The town where she grew up was so small that most travelers passed through without realizing it existed. Rows of weather-beaten houses lined the single main street, and the diner with a neon open sign flickering after midnight was the only place still alive when the rest of the town had gone to sleep. It wasn't a place where big dreams were born, at least not for most people. But for her, the sky had always been different. She remembered lying on the hood of her father's old truck as a child, staring up at the endless expanse. While other kids pointed out shapes in the clouds, she tracked the faint white streaks left behind by jets, imagining the lives of those inside. She wondered where they were going, what they saw, and what it felt like to be closer to the stars than the earth. Someday, she whispered to herself, as a streak of light cut across the evening sky. Someday, I'll be up there too. Her family didn't share the same vision. Her father, a factory worker with hands scarred from decades of labor, laughed when she once told him she wanted to fly jets. "Jets?" he asked, wiping the sweat from his brow as he came in after a double shift. "Sweetheart, that's not for us. That's for kids with money, connections. Not for girls from towns no one's ever heard of." Her mother was gentler, though no less doubtful. "There are safer jobs, baby," she would say, folding laundry late at night. "Jobs that don't break bones or hearts. Your brother's already working at the plant. Maybe nursing or teaching, something steady. You're smart enough for that." But nothing else called to her the way the sky did. At school, she wasn't the star athlete or the homecoming queen. She wasn't invisible either, just the quiet girl with the strange dream. Teachers smiled politely when she said she wanted to join the Air Force. Some encouraged her, most changed the subject. One guidance counselor flat out told her, "Sweetheart, women don't fly fighters. You could try transport planes, maybe helicopters, but F-22s? No." She left the office that day with her fists clenched, more determined than ever. What her classmates didn't know was how hard she worked behind the scenes. Every morning before the sun came up, she ran laps around the dusty track, building endurance. After school, while others went to football games or hung out at the diner, she stayed in the library, reading physics, aerodynamics, anything that could give her an edge. When the town slept, she sat under a dim lamp, filling notebooks with calculations and practice test questions for the academy entrance exam. Her family's finances were a constant obstacle. Flight lessons were out of the question, so she taught herself what she could from books and online simulators. At one point, she even built a makeshift cockpit in her garage out of plywood, an old monitor, and a second-hand joystick. Her brother teased her mercilessly, calling it mission control for a space toy, but she didn't care. Every late-night practice session brought her one step closer to the sky. Then came the day she finally told her parents she was applying to the U.S. Air Force Academy. Her father put down his coffee, staring at her across the table. "Do you even understand how hard that is? Thousands of kids apply every year. Kids with perfect grades, top sports medals, senators writing them recommendations. What do you have?" She swallowed. "I have drive, and I won't quit." He shook his head, frustrated. "Drive doesn't put you in a cockpit." But her mother, though still uncertain, placed a hand on hers. "If this is what you really want," she said softly, "then don't let us be the ones to stop you." The application process was brutal. Essays, fitness tests, interviews, it felt like climbing a mountain with no oxygen. She received rejection letters from scholarships, faced doubt from almost everyone around her, and wrestled with her own fear of failure. There were nights she stared at the ceiling, asking herself if everyone else was right, if maybe she was chasing a dream that didn't belong to her. But every time she thought of giving up, she remembered the roar of jets overhead and the promise she'd whispered to herself as a child. Her determination caught the attention of a retired colonel who lived on the edge of town. He had flown fighters in Vietnam, and though he'd grown gruff with age, he saw something in her that reminded him of himself. One afternoon, after watching her practice sprints on the track, he approached. "You serious about this?" he asked. "Yes, sir," she said, breathless but unwavering. "Then you'll need more than books and running. You'll need discipline. You'll need to learn how to think when you're exhausted, when everything's against you. You ready for that?" She nodded. From then on, he became her unofficial mentor. He drilled her on mental toughness, pushed her past her limits, and reminded her constantly that respect in the military wasn't given, it was earned. He was harsh, but he was fair, and she absorbed every lesson like a sponge. By the time she was 18, she was ready. When the letter from the Air Force Academy arrived, her hands trembled as she opened it. For a moment, the words blurred together, her heartbeat pounding in her ears. Then she saw it. "Congratulations." She screamed, startling her mother, who rushed in from the kitchen. Her father, though still skeptical, let out a low whistle and muttered, "Well, I'll be damned." But not everyone in town was happy for her. Some classmates laughed, saying she'd wash out in the first year. A few adults whispered that she was throwing her life away. Even her brother joked, "Don't crash the first time they let you near the controls." She ignored them all. On the night before she left for Colorado Springs, she climbed onto the hood of her father's old truck one last time. The sky stretched endlessly above her, full of stars and possibilities. She closed her eyes, listening to the stillness, and made herself a promise. No matter how hard it got, no matter how many people doubted her, she would not quit. She would earn her wings, and someday she would fly the very jets she had dreamed of as a child. And with that, the girl from the forgotten town stepped into the unknown, ready to chase the impossible. The Air Force Academy was nothing like home. The moment she stepped onto the grounds, the mountains rose high above her, sharp and intimidating, as if nature itself was testing her resolve. The manicured lawns, gleaming buildings, and perfectly aligned formations of cadets seemed like another planet compared to the dust roads of her small town. On the first morning, the alarm went off at 4:30 a.m. She barely had time to register the sound before the door flew open and an upperclassman stormed in, his voice like a thunderclap. "Get up! Move! You've got 30 seconds." Chaos erupted in the barracks. Bedsheets flew. Boots slammed against the floor. Cadets tripped over each other in the scramble. She was no exception. Her hands shook as she tried to pull on her uniform, and by the time she reached formation, she was still tucking in her shirt. The upperclassmen noticed everything. "You call that squared away?" One barked, his face inches from hers. "Pathetic. What are you even doing here?" The words stung, but she bit her lip and stood at attention. This was the test she had prepared for: endless drills, endless criticism. It was designed to break her down. But she refused to crack. Training was relentless. They ran until their lungs burned, marched until their feet blistered, and studied until their eyes blurred. Failure wasn't just possible. It was expected. Many cadets quit within weeks. And there was the constant whisper of doubt, not just from others, but from within herself. She noticed quickly that there were far fewer women in the program. Out of the hundreds of cadets in her class, only a small handful were female. And the imbalance was felt everywhere, in the locker rooms, in the flight simulators, in the casual jokes muttered when they thought she wasn't listening. "Bet she won't last a month. She's just here for diversity." Flying fighters? Not a chance. Every comment cut deep, but instead of arguing, she let her performance speak. Her first challenge came in the flight simulators. The instructors wanted to see how cadets handled high-pressure situations, engine failures, sudden weather shifts, enemy encounters. Most cadets buckled, fumbling with controls or panicking when alarms screamed. But not her. The moment the simulation began, her mind shifted into focus. She'd studied every manual, every emergency procedure, and her hands moved instinctively across the controls. When the simulated engine failed, she kept her voice calm, announcing each step with precision. She guided the plane to safety while others in her class spiraled out of control. The instructor raised his eyebrows when the simulation ended. He didn't smile, but his nod was enough. She had proven herself, at least for that day. But victories were rare and fleeting. Physical training was merciless. She was strong, but not the tallest or fastest. On obstacle courses, she pushed until her muscles screamed, sometimes collapsing across the finish line. More than once, she heard snickers behind her, voices saying she was too small, too weak. One afternoon during combat training, a male cadet twice her size was paired against her. The drill instructor barked, "Defend yourself." The fight was brutal. He lunged, knocking her to the mat again and again. The other cadets laughed, cheering him on. Blood dripped from her nose. Her ribs ached, but she refused to stay down. Each time she hit the floor, she dragged herself back up. By the end, bruised and battered, she was still standing. The instructor blew his whistle and looked at her with something like approval. "That's the kind of fight we need," he said. The other cadets went silent. She wasn't the strongest or the biggest, but she was the one who wouldn't quit. The academic workload was just as demanding. Engineering classes, military strategy, advanced physics, all stacked on top of the endless drills. Nights were long, and sleep was a luxury. She learned to live on coffee and sheer determination. While others crammed last minute, she studied with ruthless discipline, often staying awake until dawn. Her mentor, the retired colonel from her hometown, kept in touch by letters. His handwriting was sharp and stern. "Remember, the Air Force doesn't care if you're tired. The jet doesn't care if you're afraid. You either master yourself or you fail." She taped one of his letters to her locker as a reminder. Slowly, things began to change. The same cadets who had once mocked her started to respect her. When an engine systems exam left half the class struggling, she was the one who explained the answers in simple, clear terms. When a grueling endurance run pushed others to collapse, she kept moving, dragging two exhausted classmates across the finish line with her. Respect wasn't given overnight. It came in glances, in small nods, in quiet acknowledgments. Then came her first flight in a real trainer aircraft. The T-6 Texan II was a far cry from the simulator she had mastered, and strapping into the cockpit felt both exhilarating and terrifying. Her instructor sat behind her, calm but watchful, ready to take over at any second. "Remember your fundamentals," he said over the intercom. "Don't overthink it. Trust yourself." The engine roared, the runway blurred, and suddenly she was airborne. Her heart pounded as the ground dropped away, the horizon tilting as she banked into her first turn. For a moment, doubt threatened to overwhelm her. What if she failed here, after everything? But then instinct took over. Her hands steadied on the controls, her breathing slowed, and she felt the aircraft respond as if it were an extension of herself. She climbed higher, the world stretching endlessly around her, and for the first time in her life, she truly belonged in the sky. When they landed, her instructor didn't say much, but he scribbled something in her evaluation. Handled stress with precision. Natural pilot instincts. Promising future. It was just a few lines, but for her, it was everything. Not that life became easier. Every step forward came with new challenges. Advanced flight training tested her limits in ways she couldn't have imagined. High-G maneuvers that blurred her vision. Dogfight simulations that demanded split-second decisions emergency drills that punished hesitation. There were days she staggered back to her dorm, too sore to climb the stairs, collapsing into bed with her boots still on. But through it all, she never forgot why she was there. One night, after a particularly brutal training session, she stood alone on the airfield, watching the stars glitter above the mountains. She could still hear the laughter of those who doubted her, the words of her father telling her it was impossible. And she whispered to herself again, the same vow she had made as a child. Someday, I'll fly the F-22. She didn't know yet how many battles she'd have to fight, or how many lives she would one day save. But in that moment, bruised and exhausted, she knew one thing with absolute certainty. She had proven she belonged, and she was only just beginning. The first time she heard the term call sign, it sounded almost like a joke. Back home, names were simple: Sarah, Jake, Emma, Tom. But here, in the fighter-pilot community, names weren't chosen. They were earned. Instructors explained it one afternoon after flight drills. "Your call sign will come when it comes," one said, pacing the hangar with his hands clasped behind his back. "It's not something you get to pick. It's something your squadron gives you. Sometimes it's funny, sometimes it's cruel. But if you earn a good one, if you earn one spoken with respect, you'll carry it for life." The cadets exchanged curious glances, smirks spreading. Some already speculated what theirs would be, throwing around nicknames like kids in a locker room. But she didn't laugh. She understood instinctively this was no playground joke. This was about belonging. And she wanted to belong more than anything. Flight training had moved beyond the basics. No more simple takeoffs and landings. Now they were learning dogfighting maneuvers, emergency mid-air recoveries, and formation flying. These weren't classroom drills. They were survival skills. Mistakes didn't mean a bad grade anymore. They meant fire, metal, and tragedy. For weeks, she poured herself into every mission. She studied playbooks, memorized aerial maneuvers, until they played in her head like music, and replayed mistakes until she could correct them blindfolded. But it wasn't just skill that defined a fighter pilot. It was trust. In combat, a wingman's voice on the radio could mean life or death. Calmness under pressure was more valuable than perfect scores. And this, she discovered, was where she stood out. It happened during a nighttime training exercise, one designed to push cadets to their limits. The sky was pitch black, stars faint against the void. She flew in formation, with 3 other jets, their navigation lights barely visible, her instructor monitoring from a distant chase plane. Suddenly, the radio crackled with static, then silence. "Comms are down." Her wingman's panicked voice finally broke through. His instruments were failing, altitude slipping. Another cadet began talking over him, frantic, their words tumbling in chaos. The instructor remained silent, waiting to see how they would react. Her own heart raced, but her voice stayed steady. "Focus, one at a time," she said, cutting through the panic. "You're losing altitude. Check your emergency power. Stabilize at 10,000 feet. Copy?" There was hesitation, then a shaken, "Copy." "Good, now slow your descent. Eyes on your backup instruments. You're not alone, I've got your 6. Her tone was calm, measured, commanding. She gave instructions step by step, and slowly the chaos died down. The wingmen leveled out, systems flickering back to life. The others stopped shouting and listened, their voices steadier now. By the time they landed, the instructor stepped out of his chase plane with an expression she couldn't read. He gathered the cadets, letting the silence stretch before he spoke. "Some of you fell apart up there," he said flatly. "And some of you didn't." His eyes lingered on her. For a moment, she thought she'd hear praise, but instead he walked away, leaving only the faintest nod in her direction. The other cadets noticed, and so did her squadron. That night, in the mess hall, the teasing began. Well, one cadet smirked. Guess Mom's voice calms us all down. Careful, another laughed. If she tells you to clean your room mid-flight, you better obey. The room erupted with laughter. She rolled her eyes, but smiled anyway. She knew the teasing wasn't cruel, it was how they bonded. But then one cadet, grinning, raised his cup to the coolest head in the sky. She's not just Sarah anymore. From now on, Echo. The word hung in the air. At first, she thought it was just another joke. But then she realized what it meant. Echo, the voice that cut through chaos. The one steady signal when everything else was noise. The nickname spread like wildfire. By morning, instructors were using it in radio checks. Her squadron wrote it on the whiteboard before drills. When she walked into the hangar, someone muttered it under their breath, half in respect, half in acknowledgement. She had a call sign. And more importantly, it wasn't mockery. It was trust. But trust had to be reinforced constantly. The fighter community was unforgiving. One good night didn't erase every doubt. In the weeks that followed, she flew harder than ever. She mastered tight turns until her body ached from the G-forces. She practiced aerial refueling until the massive tanker loomed in her nightmares. She memorized weapon systems until she could operate them in her sleep. And all the while, Echo grew into her. During radio drills, her voice carried calm assurance. During simulations, cadets who once laughed at her now asked for her input. Even her instructors stopped questioning whether she belonged. They knew she did. Still, she carried the weight of expectation. Echo wasn't just a name. It was a standard. It meant she couldn't afford to falter, not even once. One afternoon, during a particularly brutal exercise, her squadron faced a simulated ambush. Enemy bogies appeared on radar, outnumbering them 3-1. The cadets began shouting over each other, panic rising. Her voice cut through again. Break left, 2 at my wing. 3, climb and cover. Stay calm, we've got this. The formation adjusted. They fought back, maneuvering in unison. One by one, they neutralized the threats. The instructors, watching from above, were impressed. But the real victory came afterward, when the squadron landed. No jokes this time. No teasing. Just silence, then a quiet, collective glance at her. The kind of glance that said, "You're one of us." Echo became more than a call sign. It became her identity. She wore it with pride, not because it was flashy, but because it meant her squadron believed in her. And late at night, when she lay awake staring at the ceiling, she thought about the girl she had been, the one who once lay on the hood of her father's truck, staring at the sky, promising herself she'd belong there one day. Now she did. She wasn't just the girl from the small town anymore. She was Echo, and the world was starting to take notice. The desert night was quiet, the kind of quiet that only came in the middle of nowhere. Her F-22 sliced through the sky at 30,000 feet, a dark silhouette against the stars. The jet hummed with power beneath her hands, its engines steady, its systems flawless. For hours she had been patrolling the border of contested airspace. Routine, uneventful, the kind of mission that lulled pilots into boredom until it didn't. Her radio crackled suddenly, breaking the calm. A voice, broken and panicked, bled through the static. "Mayday, Mayday, this is Falcon Transport 7. We've lost engine 2, repeat. We've lost an engine. Altitude dropping, need immediate assistance." Her grip tightened on the stick. A transport? Out here? She adjusted her radar, and there it was. A massive C-17 transport lumbering across the sky, its heat signature flickering. She frowned. Those planes weren't supposed to be here. They usually carried troops or equipment between bases. far from contested zones. Then the call came again, sharper, more desperate. Mayday. We're carrying 182 souls on board. Repeat 182. We are not going to hold altitude. Her blood ran cold. 182 lives. Hanging by a thread. Falcon 7, this is Echo, F-22 on station. I've got your 6, she replied, her voice steady despite the adrenaline surging through her veins. The transport crew's relief was audible. Copy that, Echo. We're losing thrust. Fuel pressure dropping. We don't know if we can keep her in the air. Her eyes flicked over her own instruments. They weren't lying. Falcon 7 was bleeding altitude, its descent uneven, dangerous. Falcon 7, listen to me, she said, her tone clipped, commanding. You are not alone. I'm here. Stay with me. Down below, the desert stretched endless and dark, broken only by jagged mountains. There wasn't a runway in sight, not within their current glide path. If the C-17 went down here, it would be catastrophic. She keyed her comms to the nearest command center. Control, this is Echo. We've got a transport in distress. 182 on board. I need immediate emergency vectors to the nearest landing strip. Static. Then a delayed reply. Echo, control copies. Stand by. We're checking coordinates. Stand by? They didn't have time to stand by. Falcon 7, what's your current altitude? She asked. 17,000 and falling. We've shut down engine 2, but 3 is running hot. She's shaking bad. Copy. Ease your pitch. Don't fight the descent, stabilize. I'll guide you. Her voice stayed calm, even as her mind raced. She remembered every lesson, every drill, every emergency simulation. But this wasn't a simulator. There were no resets. No do-overs. One mistake, and 182 people would die. Minutes dragged on like hours. The transport's crew was panicked, voices overlapping, alarms wailing in the background. At one point, a co-pilot snapped, "We can't hold this. She's going down." Negative. Echo cut in sharply. Listen to me. You can hold her. Slow is smooth. Smooth is steady. Trust your instruments. Trust your training. You've got this. The words weren't just instructions. They were lifelines. Her jet stayed close. So close, she could almost see the terrified faces through the cockpit glass. She adjusted her speed, flying wingtip to wingtip. Her F-22's sleek frame, a guardian shadow beside the hulking transport. It wasn't just technical, it was psychological. If the crew saw her there, steady, unflinching, maybe they'd believe they could survive. Finally, control came back on the radio. Echo, nearest strip is Al-Khair Airfield, bearing 090, 80 miles. It's short, but it's all we've got. 80 miles. She did the math instantly. A damaged C-17, bleeding fuel, engines failing. 80 miles was an eternity. But it was the only option. Falcon 7, this is Echo. We've got a runway 80 miles east. I'll get you there. Stay with me? The pilot's voice cracked. Copy. Echo, lead the way. Every second was a battle. The transport's engines coughed and sputtered, the aircraft shuddering violently. Altitude continued to drop 15,000, then 14. The desert loomed closer, unforgiving. Echo, we're losing hydraulics, the co-pilot shouted. Stay calm, she replied instantly. Switch to backups. Keep her level. Do not overcorrect. Her own hands sweated inside her gloves, but her tone never wavered. Calm, steady, firm. She became their anchor. Enemy chatter spiked on her radar. A hostile patrol had picked up the crippled transport. Her stomach tightened. If enemy fighters engaged now, Falcon 7 wouldn't stand a chance. "Falcon 7, focus on your systems," she said. "I'll keep the skies clear." She armed her weapons, scanning the horizon. For tense minutes, her radar pinged with distant contacts, but none closed in. Either luck was on their side, or her presence had deterred them. Still, she kept one eye on her radar, the other on the transport. One mistake in either direction could mean disaster. At 12,000 feet, the runway finally appeared on the horizon, a faint strip of light in the endless dark. "Falcon 7, you see it?" she asked. A pause. Then, "We see it." "God, we see it." "Good. Line her up. Stay steady. You've got this." The C-17 groaned and shook as the crew fought to align. Sweat poured down their faces, but her calm voice never stopped. "Easy. You're coming in hot, reduced throttle. That's it. Keep your nose level. Eyes on the lights. You're right on course." The ground rushed up. Tires screeched, sparks flew as the massive transport slammed onto the short runway, bouncing hard before settling. Smoke billowed, metal screamed, but it stayed upright. And then silence. They had landed. All 182 of them. Alive. Echo circled overhead, her heart hammering, watching as emergency vehicles raced toward the transport. For a long moment, she just stared, hardly believing it. Then her radio crackled one last time. "Echo, this is Falcon 7. We don't know how to thank you. If it weren't for you, none of us would be here." She swallowed hard, forcing her voice steady. "Just doing my job." But deep inside, she knew it wasn't just a job. It was a miracle. Later, when she landed, the weight of what had happened finally hit her. Her legs trembled as she climbed out of the cockpit, adrenaline giving way to exhaustion. Around her, ground crews and commanders swarmed, peppering her with questions. But she barely heard them. All she could think about was the image of that transport hitting the runway, sparks flying, and the knowledge that 182 families would sleep easier tonight. And in the quiet of her quarters, as she finally let herself breathe, she whispered the words she had carried since childhood. "Someday, I'll fly to save lives." And now she had. The runway lights still glowed faintly in the distance as emergency crews rushed the crippled transport. From above, Echo's F-22 circled like a guardian hawk, her eyes locked on the massive C-17 that had just clawed its way down alive. But the crisis wasn't over not yet. She knew it the second her radar flared. 2 enemy contacts, fast movers, screaming in from the west. Their signatures lit up her screen like firecrackers. Her heart dropped. The transport was still crawling along the runway, vulnerable, passengers shaken, crew exhausted. If enemy fighters targeted them now, it would be a massacre. "Control, this is Echo. Hostile aircraft, bearing 270, closing fast. Request intercept clearance." The answer came instantly. "Echo, intercept authority granted. You are weapons free." Her jaw tightened. "Copy. Engaging." She pushed her throttle forward, the F-22 roaring to life as it banked hard. The desert blurred below, light streaking across her canopy. She wasn't just flying now, she was hunting. But in the middle of the chaos, she still heard the voices of Falcon 7's crew. "Echo, this is Falcon 7. We owe you everything. Thank you." She cut in sharply, her focus razor thin. "Falcon 7, stay put. Keep your people safe. I'll handle this." It wasn't bravado. It was a promise. Her radar confirmed it. 2 enemy jets, older generation but dangerous nonetheless. Their heat signatures burned red as they closed. Her training kicked in. She knew their capabilities, their weaknesses, their favorite tactics. But she also knew the stakes. If even one of them got through, it could mean disaster for the lives she had just saved. The enemy pilots tried to flank. She saw the move instantly, felt it like instinct. With a flick of her wrist, she pulled her Raptor into a climb, engines howling as she shot into the night sky. At 35,000 feet, she rolled, inverted, and dove, locking on to the first contact. Her missile tone sang. She fired. A streak of light ripped through the night, and seconds later impact. The first enemy jet vanished in a ball of flame. One down, but the second was smarter. He banked away, juking hard, cutting low toward the airfield. Her pulse surged. If he broke through, the transport would be a sitting duck. Not today, she muttered under her breath. She chased, her F-22 accelerating like a predator unleashed. The G forces slammed her into her seat, but she held steady, her breathing measured, her focus absolute. The enemy dove lower, skimming the desert floor, hoping to lose her in the terrain. But the Raptor wasn't just any jet, it was an apex hunter. Her radar danced, her sensors tracking every move. She closed the distance, locked on, and fired her guns. Tracer fire cut across the night, and the enemy fighter erupted in sparks before cartwheeling into the sand below. Two down, the skies were clear. Her comms lit up with cheers. Ground control. Falcon 7's crew. Even the shaken voices of medics on the ground. Echo, you did it. You saved us twice tonight. She exhaled slowly, the tension draining from her muscles. Just doing my job, she repeated, her voice calm, though her chest still pounded like a war drum. But in her mind, she knew the truth. She hadn't just done her job, she had commanded the skies. When she landed back at base, the atmosphere was electric. Mechanics and crew members crowded the tarmac, their faces lit with awe. They had heard the radio chatter, watched her battle unfold in real time. And the transport's passengers 182 shaken, but living souls stood waiting too. Families, medics, soldiers, all of them alive, because one woman had refused to let fear take over. The moment she stepped down from her cockpit, a roar of applause thundered across the hangar. But she didn't smile. Not yet. Her thoughts were still with the crew of Falcon 7, remembering the desperation in their voices, the tremor in their hands as they fought to keep control. She remembered her own voice, calm and commanding, guiding them step by step. That was the moment she realized something powerful. Tonight hadn't just been about flying. It hadn't just been about combat. It had been about leadership. Later, during the debriefing, her commanding officer leaned forward, eyes sharp. You didn't just fly tonight. You took control of an impossible situation and saved 182 lives, then defended them against a threat no one else even saw coming. That's not just skill. That's command. The words sank deep, heavier than any metal. Command. She thought of the enemy jets, the crippled transport, the burning desert sky. She thought of how every soul on that transport had trusted her, even if they didn't know her name, even if they never saw her face. And she realized, for the first time, she wasn't just Echo, the pilot. She was Echo, the commander of the skies. That night, alone in her quarters, she sat with her flight helmet on her lap. Her reflection stared back at her from the visor, tired but unbroken. She thought of the young girl she once was, the one who had looked up at the sky and whispered, "Someday, I'll fly to save lives." She had done it, and she would do it again. For her, flying was no longer just a mission. It was a vow. The hangar was quiet now, the thunder of applause replaced by the low hum of machinery and the shuffle of boots. Echo stood near her aircraft, helmet still tucked under her arm, her flight suit damp with sweat. The smell of jet fuel hung in the air, heavy and familiar. Around her, ground crew members still exchanged wide-eyed looks, whispering her call sign, like it carried weight it had never carried before. Echo, Echo saved them. Echo shot down 2 birds in one night. She wanted to wave it off, to fade into the shadows like always. But there was no hiding anymore. Not after tonight. Inside the operations center, the atmosphere was electric. Screens replayed the radar footage, grainy but clear enough to tell the story. A crippled C-17 saved from the brink of disaster. 182 lives guided to safety. And 2 hostile jets destroyed in the same breath. The room erupted in cheers when the final replay showed her F-22 circling above the burning wreckage of the last enemy fighter. "Damn," one officer muttered. "She did it all. Alone." Another shook his head. Not just alone calm, commanding. You could hear it in her voice. She was holding those men together when the aircraft was falling apart. They weren't wrong. News spread faster than she imagined. By morning, the story had already reached command centers across the United States. Then it jumped oceans. Headlines flashed. F-22 pilot guides 182-2. Safety. 1 woman against the sky. Call. Sign Echo saves the day. Her photo won. She had taken reluctantly years. A go for the squadron archives was everywhere. Grainy, helmet tucked under her arm, the quiet look of determination in her eyes. She hadn't sought fame, but fame had found her. She sat in her quarters, staring at the glowing screen of her laptop as reports rolled in. Families of those on Falcon 7 were flooding social media with gratitude. Parents, spouses, children voices breaking as they said the same words again and again. She saved them. She saved us. She saved 182 lives. She scrolled, her throat tightening. It didn't feel real. One video stopped her cold. A little girl, no more than 6, clutching a stuffed bear as she whispered into a shaky phone camera. "Thank you, Echo. You saved my daddy." Her chest ached. She closed the laptop. Her commanding officer called her in that evening. He didn't waste time. "You're trending worldwide," he said flatly. And that's not a sentence I thought I'd ever say about one of my pilots. She gave a small, uneasy shrug. "Sir, I just did what anyone else would have done." He leaned across the desk, his eyes sharp. "No, that's where you're wrong. 99 out of 100 would have cracked under that pressure. They'd have lost the crew, lost the plane, maybe even lost themselves. But not you. You didn't just fly, you led. You commanded. That's why they all lived." His words echoed in her mind long after she left. She had never thought of herself that way. Leadership wasn't about medals or speeches. It was about steadying a trembling voice, giving people something solid to hold on to when everything else was falling apart. And she had done that. Within days, invitations began flooding in. News networks wanted interviews. Military officials wanted her at ceremonies. Politicians wanted to shake her hand. She hated the idea. She wasn't a performer. She wasn't an actor on a stage. She was a pilot, a soldier. Her place was in the sky. Still, the pressure mounted. Eventually, she stood in front of a sea of cameras at a press conference she hadn't asked for. Bright lights burned her eyes. Microphones jutted toward her like spears. One reporter shouted above the noise, "Echo, how does it feel to be a hero?" She froze. The word clawed at her chest. Hero. Her mind flashed back to the cockpit of Falcon 7, the alarm screaming, the co-pilot's panicked voice, the shuddering of the aircraft as it fought to stay alive. Hero? No. She took a breath, steady and deliberate. "I did my duty," she said finally. "I was trained to protect lives, and that's what I did. I'm grateful everyone made it home. That's all that matters." The room went silent. Cameras clicked. But she didn't linger. She stepped down and walked away, her voice still echoing in the air. At night, when the world quieted, the weight of it pressed hardest. She remembered the faces she hadn't seen but had felt, the fathers, mothers, sons, daughters, packed into that transport. She thought of how close they had come to dying, how thin the line was between survival and disaster. She thought of the enemy jets she had destroyed, the fireballs lighting up the desert night. She wondered briefly if those pilots had families waiting too. And then she thought of the little girl with the teddy bear. Her whisper lingered the longest. "Thank you, Echo." For the first time, she allowed herself to cry. Back in training days, instructors used to tell her, "There will come a moment when the mission isn't just about you. When lives depend on you, that's when you'll know who you are." She finally understood. She wasn't just a pilot anymore. She wasn't just a call sign on the radio. She was the difference between life and death. And the world knew it now. Yet even with the recognition, medals pinned to her chest, and handshakes from generals, she kept her focus. Because she knew this truth: the skies were unpredictable. Crises didn't care about medals. And somewhere, someday, another call for help would crackle across the radio. And when it did, she would be there. Not for headlines, not for fame, not for applause, but because flying wasn't just her job. It was her vow. And that vow had just been written into history. The base was alive with energy the morning the orders came through. Soldiers straightened their uniforms. Commanders rehearsed their remarks. And even the youngest recruits whispered in anticipation. Something historic was about to happen. Echo had been told only the basics. She was to attend a formal ceremony at the airstrip. She expected a medal, maybe a handshake, perhaps a few words from the commanding officer. She didn't care much for pomp and circumstance, but she respected the tradition. What she didn't know was that this was bigger than a medal. Much bigger. As she walked toward the stage, her boots clicking against the pavement, she caught sight of the massive crowd gathered at the hangar doors and spilling across the tarmac. Hundreds of airmen stood in formation, their uniforms crisp in the morning sun. Families filled the bleachers, waving flags. And at the very center of it all sat the passengers of Falcon 7 to 182 men, women, and children. Every single one alive because of her. She froze for a heartbeat, her throat tightening. She hadn't expected them to be here. Their faces, grateful, tearful, radiant, were more overwhelming than any medal could ever be. Her commanding officer stepped forward, voice booming through the speakers. "Today, we honor not just a pilot, but a leader. A woman whose calm, courage, and skill saved 182 lives. When chaos struck, when fear threatened to take hold, she became the voice of strength, the anchor in the storm. She lived up to her call sign. She became the echo that guided them home." The crowd erupted in applause, but the words cut deeper than any cheer. She had always thought of echo as just a call sign, a string of letters assigned at random. But now, spoken aloud in this context, it carried a weight she hadn't realized before. She wasn't just echo anymore. She was the echo, the officer continued, his voice solemn. For extraordinary courage and leadership in the face of crisis, and for actions that reflect the highest traditions of the United States Air Force, we hereby award. She felt the weight of the medal as it was pinned to her chest, heavy with meaning. Cameras flashed. Applause roared. But in that moment, it wasn't the medal she felt, it was the silent gravity of 182 lives pressing against her heart. She bowed her head slightly, accepting it not as a reward, but as a responsibility renewed. Then came the moment that no one had told her about. "Ladies and gentlemen," the commander declared, "the call sign Echo will forever be honored in this wing. And today, for the first time in history, our F-22 squadron will give that honor a voice." Confused murmurs rippled through the crowd. Echo herself tilted her head, unsure what he meant. And then the ground shook. From the far end of the runway, a formation of F-22s roared into the sky, their engines screaming in unison. They climbed higher, their vapor trails cutting white scars across the blue. Then, in perfect synchronization, the lead jet broke formation in dove, engines thundering low across the base. As it streaked overhead, the sound rolled and bounced between the hangars and mountains. It wasn't just noise. It was a voice. It was an echo. Her call sign, alive in the very roar of the jets she loved, carried across the airfield. The sound wrapped around her, shaking her chest, filling her lungs. For a moment, it felt like the sky itself was speaking her name. The crowd gasped, that erupted into cheers louder than before. Soldiers saluted. Families wept. Even hardened officers wiped at their eyes. But Echo just stood there, rooted to the ground, her throat closing as emotion surged through her. She had never cried in uniform. Not once. But now, tears blurred her vision as she whispered under her breath, "That's me. That's my name." After the ceremony, passengers from Falcon 7 surrounded her. A father clutched her hands, his eyes wet. "You don't know what you gave us. You gave us time. You gave us tomorrow." A woman pressed a photo of her children into her palm, whispering, "You saved my babies." And then, the little girl she had seen in that shaky video appeared, her teddy bear still tucked under her arm. She looked up at Echo with wide, awed eyes. "You're real," the girl said softly. "You're the one who saved my daddy." Echo knelt, her medals clinking softly against her uniform. "I'm real," she whispered back, her voice breaking. "And I'm so glad your daddy came home to you." The little girl hugged her fiercely, and for once, Echo didn't hide from the moment. She hugged back, tightly, grounding herself in the warmth of life she had helped protect. That night, the ceremony still echoed in her mind literally. The roar of the F-22s, the way the sound had bounced across the sky, felt seared into her very soul. For the first time, she understood the full meaning of her call sign. She wasn't just Echo because of radio chatter. She was Echo because her actions reverberated through the lives she had saved, through the hearts of those who now lived to tell the story, and through the history that would carry her name long after she was gone. The echo wasn't just sound. It was legacy. In the quiet of her quarters, she unpinned the medal and placed it on the desk. Then she reached for her helmet, her reflection staring back at her from the dark visor. She touched the name stenciled on the side, Echo. For the first time, she felt at peace with it. For the first time, she believed it wasn't just a name she had been given. It was who she was meant to be. Tomorrow, the skies would call again, and she would answer, not for the glory, not for the recognition, but for the echo of responsibility that would always live inside her. Because when the sky called her name, she would always respond, always. The base grew quiet after the ceremony. The flags were folded, the crowds dispersed, and the jets that had thundered in tribute now slept in their hangars, silent giants waiting for their next call. But Echo could still feel it. The sound of the squadron roaring across the sky lingered in her bones. The way the air had vibrated with her name, the way the crowd had erupted, it wasn't just a memory. It was a mark etched into her soul. Yet as the noise faded, another truth surfaced. Tomorrow would come, and with it, another mission. The world did not stop for heroes. The skies never stayed quiet for long. In the days that followed, she returned to her routine. Pre-flight checks, patrols, training sorties with younger pilots who now looked at her with something more than respect. They watched her closely, hanging on every instruction, every gesture. as though she carried answers they had all been waiting for. She could see it in their eyes, Hope. Once, she had been just another pilot, blending into the roster. Now, when she walked into the hangar, conversations hushed. They didn't just see Echo. They saw what she had done. What she had proven was possible. And that, more than medals or ceremonies, carried weight. One night, after a long sortie, she sat in the squadron briefing room alone. The projector was still on, its faint blue glow washing across the maps pinned to the walls. On the table lay a stack of letters, hundreds of them. They had arrived from every corner of the country. Families of the Falcon 7 passengers. Strangers who had seen the story on the news. Children who wanted to be pilots, just like Echo. She opened one at random. Dear Echo, my son was on Falcon 7. He came home alive because of you. I don't have words for what that means, so I'll just say thank you. You gave me back my boy. Her eyes blurred, and she set the letter down carefully. Another read, My little brother says he wants to fly jets one day. I told him to remember your name. And another, You don't know me, but you saved my family. You'll always be part of our story. She leaned back, staring at the ceiling, overwhelmed. She hadn't asked for this. She hadn't dreamed of headlines or children writing her name in notebooks. All she had ever wanted was to fly, to serve, to protect. But maybe that was the point. Legacy wasn't something you chased. Legacy was something you built, moment by moment, decision by decision, until one day the world looked up and realized you had left a mark. Weeks later, she stood once again on the flight line at dawn. The desert air was cold, her breath visible as she adjusted her gloves. Her F-22 loomed before her, sleek and silent, its canopy catching the first gold rays of sunlight. She ran a hand across its smooth frame, her fingers brushing over the stenciled letters. Echo. The sound of that name still lived in her ears. The roar of the jets from the ceremony. The grateful voices of Falcon 7's crew. The little girl whispering, You saved my daddy. Echo. It was no longer just a call sign. It was a reminder. As she climbed into the cockpit, the familiar weight of the helmet settled over her head. The world outside muffled, replaced by the quiet hum of her own breathing. The canopy lowered, sealing her into the place where she belonged. The tower cleared her for takeoff. Engines roared to life, vibrations shaking through the ground. The jet surged forward, faster, faster, until the earth fell away and the sky opened wide before her. Flying never got old. No matter the hours, no matter the fatigue, the sky always felt like home. She banked left, the horizon tilting, the desert sprawling endlessly beneath her. And as she climbed higher, she heard it not in her headset, not in her instruments, but in her heart. The echo of that night. The echo of 182 voices she had carried home. The echo of her own promise that she would always answer the call. Far below, the world carried on, unaware of the watchful shadow cutting through the clouds. But for those who had been on Falcon 7, for their families, for the countless strangers inspired by her story, her presence was a living reminder that sometimes one person could stand between life and death and tip the balance toward life. And for the younger pilots watching her from the ground, she was proof that greatness wasn't about glory. It was about responsibility. It was about what you did when the sky went dark and voices cried out for help. They would carry that lesson forward. They would carry her echo. Long after she landed, long after her own career would one day end, her name would still fly. New recruits would hear the story. Children who had written her letters would grow up and tell their children. And perhaps, somewhere down the line, a new pilot would take the call sign, Echo, not to replace her, but to continue the reverberation she had started. Because an echo doesn't die. It carries, and hers would carry forever. In the quiet of that evening, as she stood once more beneath the vast stretch of stars, she closed her eyes and whispered the same words she had whispered since she was a child. Someday I'll fly to save lives. Only now she knew, someday had already come, and the sky had answered back with an echo.